I mean, if you sort of think back to even as recently as the last general election, Facebook was sort of barely around. Even as recently as the local elections last year, Twitter was sort of barely featuring in politics. So it's very easy to draw a picture of sort of excitement about all these things that are changing and how it might really revolutionise British politics. But I'm going to leave that to sort of Jonathan and Derek and sort of do my usual sort of slight sceptic act. Because I think if you look back a decade, it's sort of back into the last century, sounds a bit dramatic, but it's still less than 10 years ago. If you sort of think back to the late 90s, and all the really quite dramatic changes there have been in politics, if you look at it from the technical point of view, email was used a bit. A lot of people had mobile phones, but it was still very much heavily fax-driven. Websites were very much like brochures, almost no interactivity, unless, really daringly, you perhaps had an email address up on there that people could click on and use. So you look at the change there has been from the technical angle between only 10 years ago and now, and it's been absolutely massive. Unfortunately, if you then take a step back and look at what's happened to politics in that same period of time, it's not really been a dramatic change, and certainly I think there has been some changes for the good, but there have also been probably quite a few changes for the worse in that period of time. So I really start from the point of view in terms of looking forward to the future, saying, well, if all those dramatic technical changes over the last 10 years haven't revolutionised politics, there's a really tough case to make to say that, well, a few more changes on top of that might really change politics. And I guess one of the reasons I have for that sort of slight scepticism is that I get an awful lot of sales calls from people wanting to sell sort of me or the party some new technology. And the thing that is most common about all of those calls is that almost everybody who's really enthusiastic about, we can really change politics by just doing this, has absolutely no experience of running an election campaign. There is this real disconnect between, on the one hand, people are really enthusiastic about what the internet can bring about, and very often, on the other hand, people who've actually successfully run elections. There are a few people who sort of bridge, I think, both camps. I mean, I think all three of us in our sort of slightly different ways do, but it's well worth remembering that the real way to often deflate somebody who's terribly enthusiastic about how politics can be revolutionised is just to ask them that simple question about, well, what experience actually have you got of doing this successfully? And so I think if you look over sort of to the US, because obviously a lot of you might be at the sort of back of your minds thinking at this point, but surely Barack Obama, he's shown how everything can be revolutionised. I think it's quite interesting if you think back across the last 2 or 3 US presidential elections, that Howard Dean certainly demonstrated there were lots of things that could be done using the internet that made it possible to campaign in a way that wasn't possible before. But between him then and Barack Obama this time, there wasn't an awful lot else that happened that really got people excited. And to me, the lesson that you draw from that is actually really what makes Howard Dean and Barack Obama in their different ways stand out, is not their use and understanding of technology in itself, but it's the fact that they were the right person at the right time with the right message. They both, in some ways, very different ways, had a tremendously powerful message that really chimed with the time. I think one of the reasons why Barack Obama has ended up being president and Howard Dean is now ex-chair of the Democrat National Committee is that Obama's message, the message that he tapped into, was one that resonated really well with the public about now is the time for change. Dean's message, tremendously powerful in its own way, was much more an internally focused message about, for goodness sake, there are some things we believe in as Democrats, let's just get up and stand up for them, which was, really chimed into, I think, what a lot of Democrat activists at the time felt about why are we always apologising for not being quite as right-wing as the Republicans. But that, as we saw with his bid to become presidential candidate, can only get you so far. But what they both had was a really effective message, really powerful source of appeal, and therefore the technology managed to do things for them. But the technology in itself can't create that if you don't have that message and appeal. And the failure of John Edwards's bid to be the Democrat presidential candidate for 2008, I think is quite a good example of that, looking at it from the other side, because in many ways his understanding of what you can do with the internet in politics and some of the things that his campaign were doing were far better, far more interesting, far more innovative, and in their own terms far more successful than what Barack Obama was doing. But in the end, he didn't have the message, and he didn't have that moment in time to chime into what the wider public wanted, and therefore he now, again, you know, is another of the long list of ex-failed presidential candidates rather than the president of the US. If it was based on technical ability at making use of social networking sites, he would probably be president, not Barack Obama. But for better or worse, probably for better, there's rather more to elections and politics than that. But I think what's turning to sort of a more positive sort of way of looking at things, I think what they both demonstrate, Obama and Dean, and I think we see on a much smaller scale in many respects in Britain, is that what the internet allows people to do is, if they really want to grasp a degree of power or political influence, and if they've got something going for them in their own right, then the internet gives you tools to do it, and it can be tremendously effective in that way. I just give a sort of trivial example, utterly trivial in a sense compared to the scale of what I've just been talking about, in terms of myself and the blogging I do at LibDemVoice.org. I mean, I can sit down in the morning and be worked up about something I've seen. Maybe it's something one of the other illustrious colleagues sat next to me have said. I can be worked up about it. I can sit down at my computer. I can blog about what my view is on that, or why I think they've got something wrong, or what facts I think they've missed out, knowing that chances are a decent spread of mainstream political journalists from across the media will read what I've written later that day. Now that is, in a sense, tremendously powerful. That, you know, gives me a really privileged position that 10, 15 years ago, or very, very few people in the country would have had. And I have that because I've decided, with a group of other excellent people, including, I see at the back Rob, who founded LibDemVoice a couple of years ago, due to the great work of a team of people who work on LibDemVoice, we built up a website that people, you know, reasonable number of people like and read and come to and comment on and pick up stories from. So in one sense, it's fantastic that people like me therefore have this ability to communicate with a wider and quite influential audience in a way that we wouldn't have had 10 or 15 years ago. But it's only effective because it's something I want to do, and I want to get involved in the political process, and I want to express my views, and I and my colleagues are putting the time to build up the audience. So it's great what it's done for me, but that's very, very different from saying, well, the internet revolutionises politics in terms of bringing the public in, because it's only working because I'm already sold on the idea that politics is worthwhile. It hasn't sold politics to me, it's allowing me to express my political interests and views more effectively. Which in a sense I think brings us back to where I started, which is I think none of the opportunities the internet opens up can really allow us to fake it in terms of forcing on the public an interest in politics that didn't exist previously. What it can do, as I've given with my example with the blogging that I do, what it can do is allow those of us who are already interested in politics a whole load of other ways of exercising influence and power. Particularly, I mean, Jonathan and Conservative Home are a fantastic example of that. Again, if you think back a few years ago, just how different the dynamics of power in, say, the Conservative Party are, and the influence that people like Conservative Home can now have on the Conservative Party's policy direction in a way that wouldn't really have occurred 10 or 15 years ago. But this is all, in a sense, for us on the inside. So for us on the inside, it does open up fantastic possibilities, but we should be sanguine about the limitations that there are also around that, in terms of we still have to work extremely hard to make the public interested in politics. Thank you.
Thank you.